Sir, how did you go into sinology? I mean, what was a vocal change in your life that you thought, ki, I'll do this? Because it's very rarely known in India, abhi bhi. I mean, what's sinology's history and what was your experience in China? I mean, how was your stay there?
I mean, as far as sinology is concerned, it's very new in India. I would say, to be precise, it started in 1809. The British missionary called Joshua Marshman, so he started it, but then it didn't go for long. He did translate a few of Analect's chapters, and then also compiled a grammar book for Chinese learning and studies, because the British, they were wanting to expand their trade and commerce with China, but it didn't happen the way Marshman wanted to go about it. And then in 1818, no, 1918, almost a century later, Calcutta University offered courses in sinology, but it also didn't work. And then I would say it was Tagore, who really was interested in Eastern civilization, and China was his favorite. He started Chinese studies in Vishavarti in 1921 when the university was founded, and he employed sinologist or orientalist, Sylvan Levy. These were the foremost scholars at that point in time, and he invited them. And soon after, in 1924, he visited China, and he thought that there is a need, for bridging this misunderstanding or reopening the channels of communion between India and China as they existed in ancient times between us. So he started, and then he found one professor called Tai Yushan, and he invited him over to Shantiniketan in 1928. So from 1928 onward, so there was a sincere effort to know China, to study China. But I think, again, the focus was culture, religion, primarily the Buddhist classics. It was only after 1964, after 1962 border war, that we in India discovered that we have not really understood China. We didn't understand their politics, the Communist Party of China, their foreign policy, their military, so on and so forth. And as a result, in tandem with Ford Foundation, we founded East Asian Studies in Delhi University. So it was 1964. So as a result, I think study of China, various domains of China, it was started in India. And later on, of course, it proliferated to other universities, like JNU was founded in 1969 and 1973. So we had a Department of Chinese here. We had a, School of International Studies, where we again offered China studies, so on and so forth. So as such, I think China studies in India, so they are very, very new. Unlike Europe, which had 100 years or more of China study. In fact, they started in you can say 15th, 16th century itself, because the way these missionaries, they were employed by Chinese emperors, so they were well versed in Chinese and Chinese classics. I think as far as this translation tradition we talked about, if you see the modern times and contemporary times, every aspect of Indian, you can say, literature or academic writing, important academic writing, so they have been rendered into Chinese by Chinese Indologists. And there are various centers of learning of Hindi, of Sanskrit, and of Indian
public universities.
Indian studies also in various public universities in China. So I think my experiences in China it has been tremendous. And I have been looking to China through various, you can say, hats or prisms. So one is the prism of civilizational interconnectedness. And whenever I go to China, I have discovered that this interconnectedness, it is seen everywhere. Wherever you go to China, I went to, say, Fujian province. In Fujian province, you can find the remains of Hindu temples. So there were Indian communities, they were staying there in thousands. And you go to Yunnan, so there you will find in Tallinn, so there are remains of Indian cultures. So you go to this Central Asian region, Tunhuang and Kansu. So where you will find in these Tunhuang grottos, it is dominated by Indian content, heavily cultural content. Even our gods, goddesses, and their vehicles like Garuda, right, Kali, right, like various other Ganesha and all. So you will find the paintings in Tunhuang grottos. So culturally, you will see that our footprints. So they are all over in China. Only thing that you have to discover in some of the temples, you would see that even the stones, which have been put there in the pagodas and Buddhist temples, there are Sanskrit inscripts, inscriptions on these. And you find the people, those who are associated with the dissemination of Buddhism in China, all over China. So this is one connect. And then, of course, from civilizational interconnectedness, then I see it through colonial connections also. The kind of connections British, the Indian people and the Chinese, they have during British India and the KMT China. And I think there are again two things I would like to discuss. One is, the kind of images, perceptions we have nowadays, or I would say the Chinese images and perceptions of India. They go back to colonial times, I would say. During ancient times, we didn't have these kind of images and perceptions.
Negative connotation that we have today.
But then again, when the British India tried to expand, tried to make inroads into, say, Bhutan, in Sikkim, and then further in Tibet, the Chinese, they become alarmed.
And also because
they starts, dispatching their officials to investigate these things. So what is the ground?
There's a special word for it, right? The Chinese officials in Tibet, which had their own army, small armies.
No, there is ambans.
Yes.
So they are called ambans. So this, I'm talking different.
Okay.
I mean, the Chinese officials, so they were dispatched in late 19th century to investigate. So what is the ground reality in British India? So how far they are expanding into these northern territories, and the kind of inputs they will have on Tibet when they are in India. And you will see people like Huang Maocai is there, and this Ma Chien-tung is there, and later on Kang Youwei, one of their top intellectuals. So he also comes to India, and all these people, so they write exhaustive diaries, notes, as the British did when they were in Tibet. And the Chinese, they get alarmed that the British India is expanding and they are the bullies, so on and so forth. And these kind of images, so they are then carried on, because
with the Nehru government,
British legacies, they have been inherited by Free India, and so these you can say sort of like historical baggages, so they also I guess transferred to India, Free India. But I would say that the Chinese expansion is diluted. Even in historical records, it has never been mentioned as a part of China. It has always been mentioned as Fu Shu Guo in Chinese, so which means a subsidiary or a tributary state, essentially, the kind of suzerainty China exercised over Tibet. So it is okay in that context. But to regard historically it as a part of China, the status of Tibet, it was very, very different, at that point in time.
And I also believe that Indian masses and Indian people should start understanding that we don't exist in vacuum. I was reading your article, and we think that it was Chinese aggression in 1962, but they rightfully, to their wishful thinking, they rightfully mention it as Chinese or PLA's counterattack
Yeah,
on
they call it
Indian.
counterattack.
Now, यहाँ पे the right wing don't leave any opportunity to lambast Nehru, but the Chinese call Nehru as expansionist.
Yeah.
Right. So, was 1954 Panchsheel agreement, was it a diplomatic masterstroke or a naive blunder?
I think it was a blunder.
Okay.
I don't think it was a masterstroke.
In any sense.
I think it was a masterstroke from the Chinese perspective.
Oh my
because
God.
they got whatever they got.
Oh.
They whatever they wanted from us, they got it. I think we didn't get anything in return. Except for a short period in time, the kind of legacies we had in Tibet, in terms of those, trade agencies in Yatu, Gyatse, and Shigatse, and our consulate general in Lhasa. So we continued it for some time.
So what did Chinese get, and what did we lose along with these trade centers?
It got Tibet, and we acknowledged Tibet as a part of China without opening, the sensitive issue of border for negotiations. We should have opened it for negotiations. And I would say that as a sinologist, and when I go through the documents, the kind of approaches we have towards these negotiations, they were not very serious.
Why?
Whereas China, so they had constituted a big committee, and it was headed by Zhou Enlai himself. And they had various rounds of talks, and decided that, what are the ripe issues and what are not the ripe issues. It's only the ripe issues they decided that they will discuss with India. And the ripe issues were trade, commerce, as we discussed, so these were the ripe issues. And unripe issues, so they were the boundary issue. So China didn't want to negotiate boundary issue in their internal discussions. Whereas Indian approach was exactly what was the Chinese approach, that we will not discuss the border issue. We will discuss only trade and intercourse.
We will not send our patrols to our own territory, because that would undermine our friendship, or the socialistic way of life.
So that was, I think, problematic from India's perspective, especially when you had taken a stance that we accept McMahon Line as an international border between India and China, which is sanctified by the 1914 agreement between Tibet and India. So this line of argument is contradictory with acceptance of Tibet as
part of China.
So that is why it was problematic. It would have been a good bargaining chip had we opened the border for negotiation, and we didn't adopt a very, very serious attitude towards resolving the border. This gentleman, he was asking Ministry of External Affairs to grant him leave for honeymoon in China. And honeymoon with whom? With a Chinese lady. So you can imagine the kind of seriousness, Indian negotiating team it had with China in 1954. So therefore, not only him, but I think even the people like Panikkar, so they had a very, very different approaches towards our problems with China. And Tibet, according to Panikkar, it was a trivial issue, whereas I think it was the issue, and it remains the issue because the boundary is straight away connected with Tibet issue.
So when China occupied Tibet, we were the winners of World War II. Our army was strong. Even it got divided among India and Pakistan. We still didn't do anything to protect Tibet from China, or we were not in a position.
No, I think it was the approaches, right? I think our approaches were different. Our approaches were
I
different.
mean, you saying that we wanted the McMahon line to be accepted,
So that
but
is
we
the
didn't want it
problem.
to protect Tibet.
So that is the problem, right? Because if you are accepting Tibet as a part of China in 1954, our entire policy, foreign policy towards China, it has to be reoriented, right, towards the new formulations that Tibet is part of China. And if Tibet is part of China, and what China considered illegal, right, it would not be negotiated. So at one point in time, of course, so they wanted to negotiate the boundary problem, but only when it was ripe. So according to China, it wasn't ripe in 1954. So it would have taken time. For example, in 1959, when the situation deteriorated along the borders, we had this Longju in eastern sector in 1959 and Kunka border clashes in western sector, where we suffered casualties. And then later on in 1960, when Zhou Enlai comes to India, so it was at that point in time that this negotiations, these negotiations between India and China, so they were conducted. And if you go through, the kind of white paper we exchanged, letter and memoranda we exchanged, they are in the form of white papers now, and also the voluminous, report of the officials of both the sides on the border negotiations. I think why China was not ready that time, why China said that it is not ripe, because they didn't know where the border, lay, and they were not aware about the coordinates of various places, longitude, latitude, and if you see the kind of questions the Indian side they asked to China about these coordinates, the China was clueless.
Wow.
So they have not reached
Because
all these
Tibet
places.
was never a part of China, as you mentioned.
Naturally, Chinese forces, they were never there in Tibet. As you mentioned that, so they had this imperial resident called Amban. Only a few hundred soldiers, so they were there deployed for his personal security. And Tibet had its own army. It manned its own borders. It fought its own wars with
China.
Foreign aggressors.
So would it be right to say that China was just waiting for the Britishers to leave?
Yeah, I think it augured well because it created a vacuum in Tibet, and China thought that it is right time to enter in, and then it filled that space.
You talked about Zhou Enlai's visit in 1960.
Yeah.
Today we are seeking that proposal only, or are we laying claims on what is actually ours? I mean,
I think India's position is very consistent, as it was there in 1960, that McMahon line is, our international boundary, and there is no question of any concessions on that. I think India was, especially in, I would say, in 80s, and even now perhaps it remains so, to have an agreement, on the basis of package deal. Package deal is the swap formula, that China will accept eastern sector, and we will accept the western sector, or the actual jurisdiction, right? So that was the policy, but I think our approaches, again, at that point in time, they were very different. Because we took a sectoral approach towards the resolution of the border, that they should be, resolved sector by sector. So it was the Indian approach. Whereas the Chinese, they said, no, it will not work. because if you are doing sector to sector, that bargaining, you can say approaches from both the sides, so they would be
That
diluted.
vanishes.
Therefore, it is better to resolve the entire border as a package deal. And in fact, one of Chinese ambassadors to India in early 90s, so he had explained what they meant by in the package deal. It is exactly the actual jurisdiction of the eastern sector by India, for the swap of actual jurisdiction of western sector by China. That way, we should be resolving the border. But now the problem is that now there is a disequilibrium so between India and China, and the kind of asymmetrical relationship we have with China. So that has created a lot of problem for India. One, China believes that there is no need for an early settlement of the border at this point in time because they are in the driver's seat, and they don't want to, negotiate borders for India's liking at this point in time. And as a result, we'll see that so China would like to, make more, you can say, problems, for India along the entire line of actual control. I mean, if you see, the kind of equipment we had, if you see the kind of infrastructure, primarily the infrastructure and logistics is extremely important if you want to win battles, right? And, asking them to man the pickets and the strongholds with pouch ammunition, it's not possible. Not only that, but also, the kind of paraphernalia you have, the kind of shoes you have, the kind of clothing you have. So we had nothing. I think.
But the media and the public was repeatedly reassured by the defense minister, Menon. And the Chinese threat was imminent, especially after 57 or 58. Still, we didn't do good militarily.
Yeah, that is the problem.
Was there any particular reason for this?
No, I think that is the, I'll say failure of India's diplomacy, right? The kind of signals which were emanating from Beijing, from our missions, is saying that, no, China will not attack us, right?
It would simply not attack us.
Yeah.
Like we were discussing the BBC interview of Mr. Nehru.
So even in political discourse, so this was the thing that China will not attack. And we see Nehru going to Colombo, right before the attack, right? So this is, I would say, the lack of understanding. And especially when China's economy was in ruins, after this great leap forward. They were reeling under the famine. And I think India at this point in time, so it was a good soft target to unify the domestic public opinion and also to salvage Communist Party from the economic problems so they were reeling under. And it is under such circumstances that, the big powers, so they will target weaker countries to salvage their own image. And I think Chinese, though, rallied behind the Communist Party and done. But I think to say that we were totally outmaneuvered by China would be also a little problematic. Because if we see some of the battlegrounds, and if you analyze, the kind of circumstances our soldiers they fought,
especially Galwan,
in these areas, right? I think they manifested absolute bravery and exemplary courage.
Yes,
right. The Battle of Nurunag also in eastern sector. So if you see the history and the kind of equipment we were having.
Yeah, and field rifles from World War II.
Yeah, and how many times we repelled, the waves of Chinese attacks. So it is very impressive.
All on just basis of brute power force, right?
Yeah. Same thing goes to Rezangla also, right?
So Major Shaitan Singh Bhati.
Yeah. So you see Rezangla. So Chinese rackets, they say that, they repelled, Indian side, they repelled the 5 waves of that attack on the post. And the kind of casualty Chinese suffered, so it is massive. So therefore, I have argued in my book that the account of the Chinese casualty, in Western sectors, so it is wrong, because Chinese suffered much more casualty in Western sector than the Eastern sector. In
Snow of the Himalayas book में वो mention करते हैं कि they even took bodies in Galwan in the 1980s.
Yeah. So that's what I have mentioned in Snow of the Himalayas, Himalayas and the Share. So this is one book, and it's written by one army officer. So he acknowledged the fact that we suffered huge losses, and 862, I think so, bodies. So they were evacuated only in 1982. Yeah.
So I would really like to mention, as sir mentioned, the Battle of Rizangla. Major Shaitan Singh Bhati was commanding the forces. It was a Ahir regiment there, and we all was from my own state, Haryana, and we should take pride in that and really remember them for And I was talking to a friend from Kashmir, and I mentioned that I was reading about Major Shaitan Singh Bhati, and he said, "Oh, don't talk about Indian Army in front of me." And I said, "Bhai, he saved you guys from the Chinese.
Yeah.
They really saved us." And I think, but then again, the political establishment failed.
Yeah. I think it's the political establishment plus bureaucracy plus, of course, our diplomats, they are covered by bureaucracy, so they need to share some of the blames, for the.
I think no one blames army. They always blame the political establishment and the new angle, that is the diplomacy, because the political establishment, as you correctly mentioned, who are taking a ride on the inputs given by the diplomacy. So, what psychological change did the 1962 war had on Chinese policymakers? I mean, did it clear any misconceptions about the Indians? I mean, they of course boast about how they won it, but they knew about the amount of casualties they had and how Indians resisted them. And even after getting defeated to a certain extent, we didn't budge. Whether it's the package deal. So, did it had any psychological changes in the minds of Chinese policymakers?
No, as far as psychological change, I think one, of course, the kind of narrative the China built around the war is that it was absolutely easy to take on the Indian army, and the Indian army was no match for the battle-hardened PLA. To some extent, I think it was all right, because the Chinese, they have been fighting the Civil War and Korean War, so on and so forth. So they were battle hardened. So there's no doubt about it. I think what is important is that so they had built a huge infrastructure, and which made their logistics much better comparing India's. And I think it is this psyche, perhaps, so they invested a lot more later on in border infrastructure. And if you see now, they are still revamping their border infrastructure, even if they have created state-of-the-art highways, making line of actual control accessible to their deployment in a couple of days. So whereas I think we on this side, so we are still catching up with building border infrastructure. And our government, so they have also acknowledged that out of the 73 projects which were executed in 2002, only 80% of those are completed as of now. But of course, the pace has picked up. But I think we really need to do a lot more, in terms of highways, tunneling, and also railways.
It's also very geographically difficult for us and relatively easy for them, I guess.
Of course, it is easy for them because
they have a plateau.
yeah, so they have on the plateau, whether it is in Western sector or Eastern sector. Of course, I think it is
More or less similar.
yeah, more or less similar. It's a level playing field. In fact, Eastern sector, I would say that we are at vantage points, many of the places, comparing Chinese. But in Western sector, of course, I think they are
At a greater advantage.
having greater advantage over us.
Come to the 1980s. You talk about a period of equilibrium. I mean, what are the other factors that led to relative peace between China and India? Was it because 60s maybe they had an edge above us? And what changed in 1980s? Was it China's focus from Maoism to development that they wanted, like they just wanted 20 to 30 years to develop in peace without being bothered by anyone, and now they have started from passive competition, they have started active military confrontation, as we saw in Depsang in 2013, Doklam 2017, and the final nail in the coffin, as
Galwan.
mentioned by Galwan.
Yeah.
So what were the factors that contributed to the relative peace from 1980s to 2009 and 10? अभी तक भी हम सोचते थे कि यार चाइना वाले बॉर्डर पे ना गोलियां नहीं चलती हैं. 2017-18 तक भी ये सोचते थे हम. So what were the factors and then what changed?
Now, one, I think, one was the US-China rapprochement. That was one of the factors, because, of course, the estrangement between China and Russia, Soviet Union. So it was taken into consideration by United States, and sort of like detente was established with China, and that demanded the opening of the economy. The second, of course, it is related to the economic, you can say, development of China, because if you see from 1949 all up to Mao's death, the China's economy, it wasn't doing great. The first, of course, the collectivization had its fallout in the Great Leap Forward, and followed by famine, and then the Great Cultural Revolution from 1996 to 1976, 10 years of chaos and turmoil in China, and the kind of political churning they were going on inside China. So they demanded that these kind of policies, so they have to discontinue it. And in 1982, it is called the Second Revolution of the Communist Party of China. So where Mao's mistakes, so they were accounted for. They said that we cannot go on for this. And then the class struggle of erstwhile, so it was given up, because Mao throughout his reign so emphasized on class struggle. Yeah, so class struggle was dropped, and since China has initiated reforms since the third plenum in 1978, so economic development, it became the center.
Primary issue.
Yeah, it became the center of development.
So is China,
and then second thing, with this, if you want economic development, then naturally you want a peaceful periphery, right? Yes. So therefore, so the notion of peaceful development, starts coming in, and India being, one of the adversaries and big country in South Asia, so China realigned its relations, with us, and this resulted in Rajiv Gandhi's, 1988 visit to China, and which you can say was a watershed, the turning point, and start of the equilibrium between India and China. We started to negotiate border, whereas we were not discussing the border, during Indira Gandhi's time also we did start negotiating. 7 rounds were concluded during Indira Gandhi's time, but mostly, it was in the wake of Rajiv Gandhi's China visit when we created a joint working group on border. So it started to negotiate border, and that's precisely I'm saying that I think one of the problems of JWG was that we started to focus on sectoral approach towards resolution of the border rather than package dealing, and which China in the mid 80s uh, told us that this is not possible, and if this is going to the approach, and then India has to make bigger concessions in the bigger area, which is the eastern sector. So it was during that point in time. So as India and China's, you can say, detente, after the 1962 started, the relationship were diversified in various areas, political, diplomatic, economic, and in even exchange of students, people. So I went to China on scholarship. That was part of the exchange program. So various things followed, and the relationship normalized. So it was during this period of equilibrium, so that enabled both India and China to grow also on the one hand, and also to stabilize border by way of bringing in these various confidence building measures, whether it is 1993 or 1996 or 2005 or 2012, then on border, and then 2013 on this the border mechanisms, on consultation.
This 2013 Chinese incursion was a major blow to Manmohan Singh government's prestige. We don't see that today. I mean, it has been brushed off as a smaller, the Galwan incident.
Yeah, I mean,
it has been managed well.
I mean, it had started. That's why I'm saying that the equilibrium started to crumble as asymmetries between India and China grew wider, and China felt no compulsion, to now maintain peace and tranquility along the border, and the kind of incursions we have seen, especially in the western sectors, they started to increase, as you rightly mentioned. In 2013, during the Chinese premier Li Keqiang, so when he visited India, and then next year Xi Jinping visited, and there was another confrontation, and then ultimately, this Doklam in 2017, and finally Galwan. So this was sort of like messaging to India. There were a couple of variables here. I would say the one was in 2019, when India abolished Article 370. It has been widely talked by the Chinese think tanks and even media. I mean, in the eastern sector or eastern Ladakh, though the Chinese side, so they try to problematize, entire Ladakh, and now they are even openly saying that we have never accepted Ladakh as part of China, part of India, and they believe that it was part of Tibet. Of course, they don't accept the Ladakhi chronicles. That they believe that since it is not supported by the Tibetan records or the Chinese records, so therefore it doesn't exist for them. So that is one thing. And second and bigger thing, I think China thought that India is slipping into the US camp, and therefore it is important, to make India realize that they should not, slip into the United States camp, or they should not embrace United States, because they believe that United States India embrace, it is tantamount to the contentment of China's rise. So which they still hold on to this position, because they think India has become an important stakeholders in United States Indo-Pacific strategy, and Quad is one of the pillars of Indo-Pacific strategy, where China sees Quad as a military alliance or the mini Asian NATO,
NATO.
so they call it.
They always try to humiliate India by saying India is the weak link in Quad. And
Yeah. They always emphasize. So I think these were some of the reasons.
so, will we be right to say that India and China would not escape the Thucydides trap? I mean, straight from Bandung, I read that China always tried to sideline India, tried to call non-alignment a sham. Basically, didn't want to see India as a leader. And now also, when India tries to, but how does it work? Quad and BRICS. How does both of them work together?
I think first on this Thucydides trap. I think before we discuss this trap between India and China, we should be discussing the trap between United States and China, right? So that is the first. We still have a way to go there and challenge China, right? It is the existing hegemon. That challenge is it is the rising hegemon which challenges the existing hegemon, right? So which India, I think, at this point in time is not a rising hegemon. No, according to the, you can say, hierarchy in the international relations or anarchy, whatever you call it, right? So therefore, I think we have a long way to go there. There is no doubt that India has potential, India has capabilities to be a great power, given the size, given the market, given the population, so on and so forth. I think we are an aspiring power or ascending middle power. I would not even.
We talk about the markets a lot, but recently I read almost a billion Indians don't have much purchasing power other than bare essentials, and the essential market that we talk about, or the consuming class, is just 10 to 14 crores.
Yeah, of course. It comes from your per capita income, right?
Yeah.
And per capita income at this point in time, it is just 3,000 US dollars, comparing China's 14,000 US dollars. So naturally, and especially when the gap between the rich and poor, the rural and urban, it is huge. So then it is the real problem for a country. For example, in India, perhaps 1% of the population, they account for almost 33-34% of the national wealth, which is alarming, right? And when you average it out with the have-nots, so then what kind of purchasing power you are talking about.
Yes.
But I think if India continues to grow with say 7%, 8% growth rate, which it has potential, because we have a lot of scope, because India has not developed, and I would say it didn't take advantage of deep globalization the way China did. And at this point in time, when the US is retreating from the global systems, right, global political architectures, then I think it becomes a little more difficult for us, to navigate where we would reach, and the kind of relationship so we aspire to have with the major powers and middle powers. So then I think we may have to, recalibrate our policies, perhaps, and perhaps also recalibrate our policies towards China in terms of growing our economy. Because I think at this point in time, China remains our largest trade partner. And irrespective of the fact that we have huge trade deficit with China, but then the fact of the matter is that China is crucial to India's development at this point in time. Why? One is, we import many of our essentials from China. If we are a pharmaceutical power today, and all the APIs, most of them, they come from China. So if China stops these APIs, almost 80% of these, they're coming from China. So then our entire pharmaceutical industry, it goes haywire. So 64% of India's electronic industry, we are dependent on China, right? And so is the case with various other, you can say, goods. So if India really wishes to grow, I think in some sector, of course, India has to study which are the sector where we can allow Chinese investment. But again, I'm a little skeptical here, because the window of opportunity which was there for roping in Chinese investment in India, I think that is over.
Over now.
Yeah, that is over now. So why I'm saying, I think 2010 to 2015, it was the period, when the Chinese, they were extremely interested to go westward, to go outward, to go global. And it would have been, benefited us and also stabilized our relations. Because if China has
Investments in India,
big stake in India, say $200 billion, $300 billion
like Taiwan has in China,
of investment, then I think these border problems and various other things that they recede in the background, so they don't tend to flare up the crisis time and again. So I think that opportunity is gone, especially when I see the Chinese academia and researchers. So they are writing articles suggesting government that we should not be propping up India's manufacturing capabilities, because they see the example of West, propping up China's manufacturing, and now China is emerging as a giant, not been able to, the West not been able to deal with this giant, how to do it, right? So that is the caution in China. But still, I think, there are certain industries where we can really collaborate with China, and perhaps it would augur, well for both the countries.
Why do West or the whole world fears China's rise? I mean, US is a hegemon. US has done innumerable things. So why do people fear China's rise? I mean, is it our thinking very West centric?
I think in one way yes, and in one way no also. If I say yes, then if you see, so when China has risen up, it has become a huge economy. It has matching technological capabilities. It is calling the bluff of United States, not listening to anyone. In fact, projecting China as another choice, right, in front of the global community.
In China's movies now, US is the main competitor.
Yeah, of course. It has been US all the time. It was never India, right? So when China is rising, I think any rising power from, the approaches of realism. So it is expansionist, right? And I think it's natural for the powers to be expansionist. So that has been the world behavior, right? We have seen the rise of United Kingdom. We have seen the rise of United States. Now the rise of China. So, and these undertones can be seen along our borders also, and along, you can say, South China Sea, and various other parts. You talk any part of the globe, and you will find China there, right? So therefore, China is one of the largest trading partner of 140 countries around the globe. So that itself, is a threatening posture for, mercantile powers in the West. And secondly is China's technological prowess. You see the automobile industry, right?
The EV industry.
Yeah, automobile industry. Who ruled the roost in the 20th century, right? It was European, it was US, it was Japan. But now China, it has taken a shortcut, rendered any mechanized automobile industry totally redundant and come up with this electric vehicles. And it is the largest exporter of electric vehicles globally at this point in time. So naturally, so that creates problem, for the developed countries and enterprises like the BMW, Volkswagen, Toyota. So they are threatened by the China's.
Even Chinese and Japanese are at odds always.
Yeah, the Chinese so knew this technology, right? And the way China has monopolized these supply chains, right? Not only the ordinary supply chain, but also of critical minerals. The United States, so they procures most of his critical minerals from China at this point in time, and so the rest of the world. So the new energy sector, be it the solar panels, be it lithium-ion batteries, be it wind turbines. So China controls almost 60 to 70% of the entire global capacity. So that is itself, a threatening posture from China. Not that China is militarily conquering these countries, but its trade interests, are all over the places. And the Western world, so those who rule the roost until now, so they are feeling threatened. And technology also, beyond this, you must have seen the DeepSeek, right? The kind of ruffles it created in the power corridors in the United States and the rest of the world. So, and then the sixth generation fighter jet, so it flew. So these are some of the indicators that the developed world or the West, even though there are ruptures now in the West with the arrival of Trump,